Hi, welcome to Happy Tales. I'm Cheryl Rosenthal, Communications and Education Coordinator at the Oshkosh Area Humane Society.
And I'm Joni Geiger, Executive Director.
And today, Joni, we have a very special guest with us.
We do.
We have Craig Bone here from the Winnebago County Sheriff's Department. He is a deputy there, a humane officer, I believe. And we are going to be talking about humane officer work and exactly what it involves and what we see in our county and how people can help in reporting these types of things. So welcome and thank you so much for giving us your time.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Good. My first question is, what's a humane officer?
Government official responsible for enforcing local ordinances and monitoring animal welfare.
Okay. So you're a humane officer. Now, did you have to go to school to be a humane officer? Did you have to have some training?
I did. I had 5 days of training down in Madison. What we learned is we studied Wisconsin statutes and we studied different tools in evaluating animals and their living conditions.
Yeah, that sounds pretty intense, 5 days. So, and is that put on by the Department of Agriculture, I think? State of Wisconsin?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
And then
All right.
you must, 5 days doesn't seem very long, but then do you have continuing classes that you have to attend on and off?
We
or-
have not.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if it's different for law enforcement
Correct.
as
Okay.
compared to because a regular person could be a humane officer, but they have to be designated and appointed, if I'm not mistaken, from
Correct.
the county. So, so now there are 4 humane officers that are with Winnebago County.
Yes.
Is that correct? So 4 people did attend the class
Yep.
through Winnebago County. Okay, fantastic. So let's talk about that. So how does that work for you as far as like someone is concerned about animal welfare? And I would assume they call the sheriff's department. So then what happens?
Well, someone makes the call to the sheriff's department and it gets dispatched, and the on-duty deputies that are working that day will go and investigate the situation. They'll document it, they'll photograph stuff if necessary, and take any action that needs to be taken that day. And then what they'll do is they'll forward the information to one of the humane officers if we need to follow up in the future, or if it needs more investigation needs to be done down the road, that's where we come in. Or if there's any questions that they have about their initial investigation, they'll reference us as a resource as well.
Sure. So you don't just you're not just handling animal complaints. You're an officer that is obviously doing, law enforcement work, and then as an addition, you're a humane officer.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
So how many calls do you get?
Well, that varies. For instance, in the winter, if we have a real cold span, we'll get a lot of calls, people concerned about outdoor animals. And maybe the shelter that they have access to and stuff like that. And then we might go a while without getting anything if we have temperatures that are moderate and we don't have any severe weather, then we don't take as many calls. So a lot of it is seasonal, and then sometimes it's unexplainable. We might go
Is
on.
it primarily rural animals, farm animals, or
No, it's a mixture.
households, or-
We probably get just as much domestic reports as we do the farm animals. I would say that more times than not, the farm type stuff is based off of the weather conditions and that sort of type of situations.
It's kind of like us. We see the same thing, seasonal kind of things. Obviously in the summertime, people are very concerned about the heat and what it can do to an animal. In the winter, the same scenario is, the weather conditions and living conditions as well. So, so now you and I had talked a little bit earlier about constables. Each township generally has a constable or somebody assigned to, I guess, what they call animal control. So if you guys get a phone call regarding a situation that someone has, geez, I saw 10 dogs at this person's house, is that something you'd respond to, or how does that work?
Yeah, we would show up. We would go out to the house. We would do an investigation, try to determine if the animals are being taken care of, if there's any neglect or abuse or anything like that. Because a lot of times if you have too many animals, you're also going to see the neglect and stuff like that if they don't have the proper licenses. Then we'd work together with the constable and the townships at that point, and if the people don't have the proper licensing, to have as many animals as what they do, then that's where the township would step in and the constable would be responsible for
Okay.
enforcing those
So
ordinances.
that's something that the constable is that's gonna be their responsibility, so to speak. So they're at the end of that after you guys have,
So
or your
if
officers.
animals have to be removed, it falls on the constable or the township to move those animals, or?
Well, it kind of is situational. If there's a crime that was taking place, then the sheriff's department is obviously going to intervene with that as well. If it's like more of a stray dog type scenario, the constable a lot of times
Sure.
will set that up, and the townships are contracted with different places to take the animals.
Right, right.
so
And we,
forth.
we work with constables as well, so,
Yep.
you know, obviously we see that scenario a number of times as far as like, just like you say, with stray animals or, you know, that type of thing, even licensing, so. So when you get these calls, are they generally, are there, do you find that generally there's some legitimacy to it, or, I mean, or is it sometimes just people's perceptions, like maybe I think a dog really is thin, but it really isn't thin, or how does that work?
Well, I think all the calls are generally legitimate. Somebody will see something that causes them to have a concern.
Right.
But then it also sometimes that is based off their perception. Use an example as horses. There's a varying degree in how people feel horses should be taken care of. Some people will be more to the side of that they're almost like a farm animal, a working animal, where other people, their horse is like a member of the family. So we do get a lot of calls about horses that you know, they're legitimate as the caller has a concern as how they're being taken care of. But when we get there, the people that have the horse or the animal still fall within Wisconsin statutes as far as the degree of what they're providing is adequate.
I think that's very important point to make up, that you guys have to follow the law. You're looking at the statutes and making that definitive decision based on the statutes. And even though, like on a personal level, you know, people have all kinds of different ideas, sometimes that's, you just have to look at what this Wisconsin statute says and go from there. So
That's correct.
no question about it, you know.
Yep.
So now let me ask you this too, as far as like, you know, we talked about legitimacy, and I appreciate the fact that you said that every call is legitimate. And I just have to say this because I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've worked with the Winnebago County Sheriff's Department that long. Phenomenal. You guys are fantastic responding to calls. I've never had a time where you guys didn't respond to a request, check things out, make callbacks. You guys really do an exceptional job, and I so appreciate the fact that you're out there doing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good. So, all right, Cheryl, what do you got?
Well, I guess it must be very difficult to determine how do you find the line between abuse and neglect, you know, when you're going out on these cases, you know, and it's difficult, I would think, to prove that, you know, was it intentional that this person, that animals are living in a particular way, or is it that they really didn't know any better, or they thought that they were really providing?
Well, that's a very good question, because that's the majority of what we deal with. It doesn't matter if it's as far as neglect, if it's intentional or not intentional. And Wisconsin statutes are very vague in separating the difference between abuse and neglect. They both would fall under the statute for mistreatment of animals. Neglect would be when you're not providing the proper food, shelter, water, care, medical care for the animal. And we see a lot of the neglect, and like you said, the people maybe don't know the proper way to care for the animal. It doesn't make it any different. Initially, what we try to do in pretty much all the neglect type stuff is we try to educate the animal owner. These are tough cases to prosecute, so we found that a lot of the problems can be solved and simply by educating the animal owner. Sometimes we'll get a vet involved, veterinarian, and just assess the living conditions. We'll assess what they're feeding the animals. We'll assess the shelter.
So once the owner is informed as to, you know, you're not a bad person, but you know you need to do things for this animal a little bit differently, they're willing to comply, and the animal is
A lot
able
of
to
times,
stay
yes,
there
they're willing to comply
and-
because I mean, ultimately, like I said, the statute doesn't separate intentional and non-intentional neglect. So they could be held to that standard and prosecuted, whether it was intentional or not. So
Okay.
with them knowing that, a lot of times they're
gonna
willing.
comply.
They're
Is there a
willing to
lot of
comply.
follow-up that you have to do on these cases?
Generally-
To make sure that somebody maintains an animal once that's been brought to light?
Yep. Generally, what we'll do is the initial investigation will take place, and we'll discuss our options with the animal owner. And I would say that more times than not, they're very willing to make the necessary changes that they have to. And then what we'll do is we'll kind of set a plan in place, and we'll stop out at various times unannounced, just to make sure that their day-to-day operations or how they're taking care of their animals isn't changing because they know we're coming, and just that they're making improvements and they're meeting the standards.
Okay.
And it seems to be a system that works pretty well.
Okay. I don't know if we
go
want to
ahead.
go into the pictures, but you brought some pictures of some different cases, and this one in particular, is that something, did you get a tip? Did somebody call this in? Or, I mean, in a farm situation, even in some homes, we don't know what goes on behind closed doors, so to speak.
Sure.
So how does that come about?
These particular cases, I don't have the answer to that. These are cases that I personally didn't have any
Okay.
association with. We have the pictures that I brought today are more, they're cases that Winnebago County
Okay.
investigated, and the people that were responsible for this were prosecuted and ultimately served their sentence. We brought these pictures to kind of use an example of the
Okay.
extremes of
Right.
Okay,
what neglect, the type of things we could see in Winnebago County being a rural farming type
Okay.
area.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think we should go into the pictures, and I am going to, let our audience know that some of this stuff is a little bit graphic. So we just want to tell them that. But I agree with you. These are the extremes. I mean, this is not, thank heavens it doesn't happen frequently. However, it does happen.
And I think it's important, I'm so pleased that you said that all calls are valid, because sometimes, perception is your reality, and maybe something that I see, I think, oh, that's horrible, horrible, and somebody else may look at it and say, well, that's not so bad.
Yeah.
But we need to have people intercede for the animals, because the animals have no voice. And if somebody doesn't speak up for them, and I would rather report something and be told, well, everything is really fine, the animals are being well cared for. I would rather have that peace of mind than always wondering, well, maybe I should have called. Maybe I
Right.
should have called.
think
Because
that's a
maybe
good
that
point,
time
Joe.
you don't call, that animal really is in jeopardy. And you could have made a difference by making that call and asking the Sheriff's Department to check it out. So I think that's important.
Yeah, very important, extremely important. In fact, I wish we had an hour today because
Yeah,
I have a lot of
this
comments.
is fast.
So let's look at some of these pictures, and maybe you can make some comments for us, Craig.
Well, this is a picture of a cow that had died. And it is an example of extreme neglect. The pasture and that the animal wasn't taken care of after it had.
Right.
It had.
So it was just
Deceased.
allowed to be there.
Correct. This is an example of a sick cow. You can see it's laying in its own feces, and the people caring for the animal had continued to feed and water it. However, they didn't make any attempt to clean it up or move it to a
Right.
more suitable
Right.
area. It's a neglect example, extreme neglect.
Right.
That's the same cow.
Same cow, but you can see how, it's living in its own waste. Has to be very uncomfortable. And I can't imagine the smell for
Yeah.
human and for animal.
That's another picture of a sick cow. You can see that it had fallen there, and there was no attempts made
It's down and nobody's...
to assist the animal. And that's an example of a pen that wasn't cleaned, it wasn't maintained properly.
So that's all feces down there.
Correct.
And
It's all
I
manure.
mean, so they're walking in I don't know how deep it is, but
Yeah.
obviously very deep.
And that's a cow laying down in the back there, or it looks like some kind of animal laying back there, hiding in the corner.
Yeah, there it is.
Oh, yep, there it
Yeah,
is.
there it is.
So,
Yeah. And I know this was not one of your cases here, but do you know if well, obviously, you said it was prosecuted, but do you know if these animals obviously, I'm assuming they were removed and
Yeah,
treated
they were
or
removed
let go?
from these farms. I don't know the ultimate outcome for these animals, these cases,
Sure.
but they wouldn't be allowed to continue to be cared for by these
Sure.
people in that condition.
Sure,
We would
okay.
intervene at that point. This is an example of, in the is winter, you can see that the water's frozen, that the animals had actually broken away the ice to get to the water.
And the water in there doesn't look all that drinkable.
Palatable.
Correct, it
Yeah.
doesn't look
Yeah.
that clean. And it's one of the statutes for Wisconsin that's pretty clear is that food, water, and shelter,
Right.
they each have their own separate statute, and you have to maintain fresh, clean water for
Yes.
your animals.
Yes. In a situation like this, I mean, this is obviously neglect that turns into cruelty because
Correct.
it's left untreated. These animals are in tremendous discomfort, if not pain. So when Cheryl talked about the difference between cruelty and neglect, we find at least that a lot of people unintentionally, and you said it doesn't make a difference, but they're not trying to be cruel to their animal. They just don't know any better. And then there are situations where people are intentionally cruel.
Correct.
Here we have more water.
Yep, that's unsuitable drinking water. This picture now is during the summer months. You can see there's algae growing in the tank.
Ooh,
Yeah.
This is a picture that obviously is going to show that there's some animal bones there, probably cow bones in the pasture, mixed in with the healthy animals.
so at one time there had to be a decomposing animal
Correct.
in with the other livestock.
Correct. It
Okay.
appears that way.
Yeah.
You can see that in the last picture with the bones that there was also some hide that kind of reinforces that the animal had decomposed there.
Right.
Okay,
you
so it
go
wasn't
in
like it
here
was, okay.
and- Yeah.
I can't imagine walking past that every day. You
Yeah.
know, for some of us, that's like, I'd have to do something, but.
And there's, I believe, open sores.
Yep, this is
Yeah.
this picture depicts they had like a leash type system set up on the cows that had rubbed
Worn right through their through their
worn the
neck.
skin away on the back of their neck. Several pictures of the cows, and then there
Wow.
also is mats. Looks like probably some manure mixed in there into the open wound on those cows. And there was several cows in this instance that had the same
Same
type
type
of
of
wound.
injury.
This is a picture that depicts, again, not cleaning the barn area. You can see there's mounds of manure, creating safety and medical hazards for the cows.
So when they're eating their hay, it's almost like they could be eating excrement with
Correct.
their
It looks
with
like
their
the hay is being tossed right on top of the feces.
Wow.
or bones.
This picture, this is some grain. Looks like a wheelbarrow full of grain.
And
It's
just
covered in flies.
With flies, and then that's going to have the larvae and the
Correct.
maggots. And this just looks like a lot of hay just kind of laying.
Yeah, the hay's not being taken care of properly, and that's the food source for the cows that are being there. So you can see
So
that.
it's exposed and
Correct.
it's probably rotting.
Correct.
Well,
This is another example of the pen where it hasn't been cleaned and the cow's living in piles of its own
Wow.
excrement, yeah.
feces, and it's very unsanitary and unsafe for the animal. And
No, I know this probably doesn't have anything to do with the sheriff's department, but when animals are found in this type of situation where they are knee-deep in excrement and waste, is somebody called in to clean that up, or is that up to the property owner?
well, in this scenario, we wouldn't come in and clean up his barn for him, but we'd probably try to remove the animals. And there are different
Right.
places in the state. One is called Heartland Animal Sanctuary, where you could take farm animals temporarily until the conditions for them are safe, or the prosecution is completed, and the courts ultimately rule on what would happen to them.
Okay, and then those
Very
animals can
expensive.
be released
Yeah.
to someone else, or?
They
Good point.
possibly at some point could be. It's very expensive. You can see if we went into a dairy farm that's being neglected, and there's 80 dairy cows there that need to be removed, that it could get very expensive to care for them.
It really does become
prosecution.
Prosecution becomes very expensive because again they're considered evidence, and as evidence they have to be cared for. So someone's got to be paying that bill, obviously.
Correct.
So from whenever you have multiple animals in these cases, it really can be a very, very costly for not only for the owner but for the county, for the place that's holding them. I mean, there just really is a tremendous amount of cost involved. Let's kind of talk about that as far as like you collect the evidence, you look at that, you write up your reports, you do that, and then it gets turned over to the district attorney's office, correct? And then they're the ones that ultimately make that decision whether to go forward with the case or
Correct.
not? Okay, all right. And so let's talk about animal cases. It's been my experience that sometimes it's difficult to prove animal cases because the laws are kind of, you said it before, they're kind of broad.
Yep.
So has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, that's my experience. It's everybody's attempting to do their jobs to the best of their abilities, but the laws are vague, and there's different styles. And cases like this, it's not going to be as hard because this is an obvious. These are obvious violations of the law. But now the majority of the type of calls we go on are not as obvious. And while there might be neglect or abuse, like I said earlier, it seems it's more productive at those instances to try to educate the owners.
I totally agree.
And ultimately, if the education doesn't work, then you would move forward with your attempts at prosecution.
Yeah. It really, it's been my experience as well, is that when you're working in these types of situations, that very often, if you can have a conversation with the owner and work out a plan, it's much more productive, and you find that ultimately the animals are going to get better treatment because of it. So there's no question, I see that.
So do you think the laws that are currently on the books, are they sufficient? Or I don't want to put you on the spot there, but
You just did.
no.
Well, I mean, we can work with them. If there was more definition to them, it would obviously make it easier at times to define clear-cut neglect and abuse, or I shouldn't say clear-cut, the ones that aren't as clear-cut. But in the statutes, we do, we have a statute for shelter. It breaks down what adequate shelter is. For food and water, both of those are in there, that you have to maintain nutritional levels and you have to supply the water. So it's there. It's just not real clearly defined like we would have in our other laws.
Right.
And do you look at things differently between summer and winter, the time of year that things are occurring, or is it still you just look at the law and then you look at what's happening with the animal?
Well, I definitely would look at it differently because as you get into winter, the animals are going to be more at risk. I mean, things can change faster. Or in the middle of summer, same scenario, if we're
Extreme
having
heat.
extreme heat, the animals, I mean, it wouldn't take a lot of time for an animal to succumb to the elements. So you always have to keep that in mind when you're doing your investigation. If it's a shelter issue or a water issue and stuff like that.
Do you have something that sticks out in your memory as far as like some of the calls that you have responded to? I know you can't get into specifics, but as far as like, is there something that you just, you thought was an interesting case or a different scenario that you normally see?
I've never been to a call with these extreme conditions, so mine have kind of always been the same. I think a lot of times what I see is that people just bite off more than what they can chew.
Yeah.
We see that a lot with the horses, a lot of times with cats as well. It gets expensive. And for cats, for instance, they'll reproduce very fast, and you might start out with a couple cats that you don't have fixed, and then all of a sudden you have a lot of cats. And people sometimes are hesitant to find places for them or
And it's difficult because there are so many.
Right, because not a lot of people want cats that are basically almost feral at that point because they weren't given any attention and stuff like that, right? And horses too, they're hard to get rid of for one right now. The economy's not very good and they're
Yep.
expensive to own.
And they're expensive to own.
So people have a lot of horses and then get in a situation where they maybe can't afford to give them the proper care or the proper feed, and those are the types of calls that I've experienced,
Right.
and that's kind of a common theme that I see.
Right.
And that's again the situation where we try to educate them, and a lot of times people are hesitant then also because they have a bond between the animal, and they don't want to separate from their animal. It's a pet. We also see horse owners. This is pretty frequently where the animal may be ready to be put down at end of life type situations going on, but that horse may have been there for 20, 25 years.
Right, horses live a long time.
People aren't
They're not comfortable making
right,
that
maybe
decision.
not making the decision. As a horse ages, its diet changes. So sometimes people will buy a horse, or they have young horses and they're very healthy, and then they'll have one horse that's very skinny, and they feel like they're giving it the proper care. But as a horse ages, you have to different nutritional
Things
needs,
changes.
and if you don't change the diet with the age, you're going to have a skinny horse. So that again is the educational, and then also there might be medical issues as they age coming into play.
And if you haven't counted on that as far as financially, you find yourself in a bind, especially if you have 2, 3, and 4 horses, and then
Correct.
all of a sudden, it's like, wow,
Now,
I'm
Craig,
spending more money on that.
We're coming to our end of our time, and I know you wanted to mention something about Crime Stoppers, so.
Sure. Yep, in Winnebago County, we have a way that you can report crimes. You can go to the Winnebago Countywide Crime Stoppers. You can call 920-231-TIPS, and that would be 920-231-8477. It's a resource that we have where you can report crime anonymously. You'll also be eligible for rewards if the person is arrested and convicted of that crime. Or you can also just call the Winnebago County Sheriff's Department and speak with the dispatcher, and we can respond to you as well that way.
Right. So, and we didn't touch upon that, I'm going to do that real quickly, is like, so someone does see something that disturbs them, they should just call the Winnebago County Sheriff's general number, correct?
Correct.
And make a report.
Yep.
Okay.
And the dispatcher will put you in touch with if whatever jurisdiction, actually, it may not be the Sheriff's Department that does the investigation.
Okay.
It may be the city of Oshkosh or Neenah. But the dispatchers will get all that coordination going, and they'll get an officer out
Super.
to meet with you.
Super. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for all of your time and all
You're
of your
welcome.
information. We really appreciate it. And so, Joni, until next time,
Happy tales to you.